I didn't actually think I was going to finish the initial Animism trilogy of videos here, but in retrospect it makes sense. I am in La Paz in the high Andes. This is the highest administrative capital in the world, and I'm actually just got back from being even higher, staying with a Kayawaya healer in the Kayawaya villages, which are way up in the valleys in the mountains to the east of Lake Titicaca. And that turned out to be, I would say, the final unlock for what we're going to be talking about in this video, which is learning from mountains, which is relating in a teaching or a student-teacher way to the more than human world. So in the first video, we looked at how the cosmos is a community of beings. And then in the second video, we looked at how that community of beings has agency outside of the human, that it does stuff independent of us. And here in the third and final video of the initial trilogy, we're looking at how we as humans can learn from these more than human beings. So we're mostly going to be talking about a much warmer mountain that I visited, I swear it's only 6 weeks ago, I think, called Guliga on the south coast of New South Wales. And this is the sacred creation mountain of the Yuin people. But the other day when I was up in the high Andes with my Kayawaya healer, and the video for that situation will be linked up below, depending on when you're watching this one, it should be up by then. If not, it's somewhere on the channel. And my Kayawaya healer, Mario, was telling me that the Kayawayas have an understanding, a familial understanding with the Apus, with the mountains, and they are the ones who teach the form of contact. So Mario calls the Apus, and the Apus provide the healing or the transformation or so on. And if you don't have that contact, you can do the ceremonies, but they won't work. And so the most important part of the process is learning from or listening to and communicating with the mountain or mountains. Now, when I was writing Ani.Mystic, I was very struck by how Guliga has been part of the transformation of Yuin country and the Yuin people. So Uncle Max wrote a book about this, My People's Dreaming, which I relied on when it comes to this notion of mountains in Ani.Mystic. And one of the things he said was that Guliga is a library, so that when he needed to learn something or uncover and restore a piece of Yuin ceremony, he would walk up the mountain and he would engage with the mountain, and that information is retained. That information is retained in this creation being known as Guliga. She has that information and he can access it as a form of a library. Now, in Ani.Mystic, a similar process is observed by Matafero Lloyd in the rebuilding of his power site on Whetu Ariki in the Ngā Ariki Kaiputahi land in New Zealand. So this idea of engaging with country as a being, and not just as a being, but as a being who teaches, and that information that colonialism or other forms of disasters has eradicated from the almost like the material memory of a people doesn't in any way impact the continuity and the accessibility of that information at all. And I'm really struck by that because I think that's better. I think having information and knowledge retained in the field means that it can't be destroyed. It is not subject to Alzheimer's. It is not subject to genocide. It is always there. And we have this idea in, well, let's call it Western esotericism. Of course, we have the Akashic field, and I say let's call it Western esotericism because the 19th century derivation of the Akashic library is not exclusively Western. The clue is in the name. Nevertheless, we have this idea that information, that memory is somewhere, I almost want to say stored, which is fine from a storage capacity perspective in the cosmos, but that's not quite right because it's as if different times are available or accessible if you know the right way of accessing them. If you have, let's say, a library card, And so the metaphor of the library is a good one. And maybe it's just because I'm a book nerd. Probably you are too if you're watching a channel like this. But what comes to mind when I sit with Uncle Max's characterization of Guliga as, amongst other things, she's the creation being, right, as a library, is the famous early 20th century philosopher William James referring to humans as pets or cats in the library, with reference to our relationship to the cosmos. Like we're in this structure, right? This place that there are other beings that appear to have access to information, like they're doing something. There's an awareness that maybe there's knowledge here or what have you, but we're pets. we're pets sitting on the laps of these beings in the library. And that I feel like is really powerful. It's really powerful to sit beside Uncle Max's characterization of Guliga as a library. Because what do you do with a library? You go there, hopefully with some humility and a clear intention to, I almost want to moralize it and say better yourself, because that's kind of true. I mean, you could be you could be banging homeless men in the library toilets. Is that bettering you? Anyway, I'm gonna keep with the idea that you have set an intention for some kind of improvement of yourself or the cosmos, right? Especially today, because books are so readily available and so readily piratable, that if you're going to a library, you're probably after some specialist material. So you really are like stepping into a student archetype and humbly setting an intention to have access to information that is held somewhere that is both yours and not yours, and you have the will or the desire to do something that improves the cosmos with that information. So a library is not just a place to urinate. It's especially today, and especially today because we need metaphors that are this rich and deep and medicinal. It is something more than just a place where facts are. The city is waking up and Latin American cities are very loud. So we may adjourn back inside, but I did just want to say, with reference to facts and books and a metaphor of a library being bigger than mere facts, mere books, because I don't want to say books are shit. I mean, I make the facts. But by centering the bigger notion of a library as a relation, as a knowledge relation, rather than a building with dead tree in it, we get a little bit closer, I would say, to having that overlap that we need with an indigenous understanding to co-learn from each other. Now, obviously, the best historical example from a so-called Western perspective for that is the Great Library of Alexandria. That was not a place just of scrolls, was it? And that's where I want you to situate when we talk about Guliga as a library. I want you to situate your mind there. Guliga as, dare I say, a cosmic library of Alexandria. Now, even though I love books, as I just said, they do have some serious shortcomings that mountains don't. Mountains are alive. Mountains have the ability to be fonts of information, and crucially information that can be eternally relevant. When you write a book, you put your words down on a screen these days, that gets printed on dead tree, and that's quite literally all she wrote. That's the information that you as a reader will go to and open up, and that's what you get. If you adopt that same capacity with a mountain, things are a little bit different. You will get, if you have the right library card, the exactly up to the second, up to date information from a mountain that you will not get from a book. Books however, will not make you quite as out of breath as the altitude that mountains can bring you to will. But you know, no system's perfect. Whew. Okay, so mountains are living repositories of living information. And in Aboriginal Australia, so referencing Guliga, it's not wrong to call this law. And in the funny twisting way of this animism adventure, I found a very good description of law in a book called that in the National Gallery in Canberra, which I would not have gone to or was not planning to have gone to. And it was a unlocked piece of information for the next stage on the journey, and so on, in the way that these kind of quests do. In the next round of animism videos, I will probably do one on quests or hikois or adventures. So I'm going to read to you from this book written by, and the series is edited by Marsha Langton, and this one's on law. The idea of law in Indigenous societies, while remaining a system of rules for social good, also includes the idea of the English word culture. Beyond this, it also captures the idea of proper practice, the correct way of living a good life as passed down from ancestors over many generations, and the idea of the way. The path through life shown by ancestors who have gone before. Keeping law is about more than just following rules. It is a way of living that honors the sacred relationships Indigenous people hold with their ancestors and homelands. This may give the impression that Indigenous cultures in Australia are static and unchanging, but this is far from true. Law is constantly evolving in response to new needs and circumstances. It emphasizes continuity with the ancestral past as the sacred bond that links people to their homelands, but offers each new generation the possibility of adding their own understanding and innovations to the ancestral store of knowledge. So this is why, in reference to mountains, I think they are, amongst other things, better containers of knowledge, because they can update. They are a being just as you are. And so going to Guliga, if you are Uncle Max, is like going to the library, but it's like seeing the ultimate librarian. Right? So she knows the correct information for that moment, for that place or point in time, and also can respond to you. This is why it's relating. And so we're using in this video the story of mountains as beings, but it's not just mountains that are libraries, right? It's just that I learned that from Uncle Max's book. It's not just mountains that are libraries. It's about the implication of living in a community of beings, especially when some of those beings, most of them, are so much older than you, is they have a kind of wisdom that if you can just understand what they're saying, and believe me, they want to share it with you, you have access to a cosmic knowledge that is so much better than what you might find in books, even good books. And I think mountains are a really good example of this because of that age. So in the case of the Apus, in the case of the mountain spirits, although Apu is can be applied to other beings in the cosmos. It's just that for Andean cultures, mountains are Apus, but rivers are Apus, and forests are Apus. It's almost like, it's not quite right to say nature spirit, but we're getting there. So all Andean cosmologies have a cyclical notion of the cosmos transforming and retransforming. And one of the reasons why the Andes, and in fact the moon, is so wise is that they have retained their form and their constitution through multiple reformulations of the cosmos. So in a real and meaningful sense, both the moon and the mountains predate the cosmos that we're in, so they know everything that's ever happened. The story with Guliga, and you know, in my limited, such as it is, experience of Aboriginal Australia, this happens a little bit. Aboriginal Australia has a crystal knowledge that is very compelling and intriguing to me. So if we tell the story of Guliga from the perspective of geology, she is a volcanic mountain, like an extinct volcanic mountain. So it's basaltic now, which means it's one big giant crystal. So the creation mountain of the Yuin is a crystal. I had a similar experience in Tasmania, visiting Dove Lake. Now, the colonial impact in La Chorita, Tasmania was probably the worst in the entire empire. So the impact on cultural knowledge has been profound, which is why restoring the understanding that things like mountains can be libraries, I think, is very important. And it's my understanding of having a few Indigenous Tasmanian friends that kind of work is going on there as well, just on a clandestine basis. But what we call Dove Lake in Tasmania, in probably our most famous national park, Cradle Mountain, is essentially a giant bowl of crystal soup. So it's a similar idea of these mountains having a crystalline structure, and this was gouged out. The lake was gouged out by glaciers, and the water runs over these mountains, and you have this crystal bowl of crystal soup. And if you look at early anthropological encounters with Aboriginal clevermen, you will find stories of crystals being embedded under the skin as part of that initiatory process. And we know, and you know how I feel about using science to validate Indigenous experience, but we actually have 200 years of materialist scientific research demonstrating things like piezoelectric effect and transduction and some sort of, dare we say, hyperdimensional drawing down capacity of crystals. So here in the south coast of New South Wales, in Yuin country, the creation mountain, Guliga, is what we would call a crystal. And when you walk on her, you feel the presence of that creation event. You feel that wisdom. You feel her as that divine mother being, and you do feel her wisdom. You really do feel that librariness. And one of the first things that occurs to me as I walk up and set the drone up and open up the country and do my respectful greetings and ask for permissions, which I should add, I do have, anyone does. It's Guliga and the surrounding area is a shining example of the restoration of Indigenous sovereignty of what was once federal and national park land. So you, if you do visit, and you should, it's powerful. You do have that permission, as is the case anywhere. Just don't be a dick. Particularly as you move further and further up into the rainforest. What I said at Lake Mungo, where she doesn't feel like Uluru. Uluru is a powerful sacred place. Guliga feels like Uluru. Obviously different because they're different beings, but it has that high, profound sanctity of a creation moment. It's a really moving experience, and one that I will certainly repeat. It's certainly a place to go back to. Now, Guliga is a woman's mountain, in my understanding of the Yuin experience of her, which I get from Uncle Max's book. So she is a female, she's the creation mother, but it's also a mountain of women's business, women's mysteries for people outside of Australia. And I just had some very unusual women's synchronicities because I went alone walking up the mountain. And the first was, as I stopped to fly the drone, two, I would say, mother-aged women were on their early morning walk up the mountain, and they went on ahead of me. And I thought, oh, that's a good sign. Like mothers, this is a creation by the mountain, and so on. And I didn't see them because I did the drones and I took my time because I was filming and so on, which was pleasant. You know, I got the mountain, I like to leave early, and I got the mountain basically to myself from a human perspective. I did see them coming back down just before I got towards the top. But I thought that's nice. It's good to see, like, because it was not just they were the age to be mothers. It had that real women's business feeling of this is a beautiful female friendship. So it had that female mother goddess kind of energy. And I thought, that's a nice little wink, you know. I'm glad this is what they do with their Saturday morning as female friends walking up this like women's business mountain. It was a nice moment. Anyway, as I am coming back down the mountain, there's a woman sitting on her veranda or porch, whatever you want to call it, depending on where you are in the world, who obviously lives on the driveway of the driveway to get to the walkway. And her veranda looks up at Guliga. And I didn't even notice her as I was walking by until I heard her voice chatting to me. Because by now it's about, 8:45 a.m. And so she's starting her Saturday morning coffee, sitting on the veranda. And she said, it's a beautiful morning for a walk, isn't it? And it was. I mean, I don't think you get too many bad mornings on Guliga. I got clouds, I got sunshine. I beat the heat of the day, but I was still sweating like a nun watching porn, let me tell you. But it was fantastic. And I just had this beautiful moving experience at the top of the saddle. And this woman's voice startled me. And I don't like this maiden mother crone thing. No one really does. But she was she had more years than the two women who were friends who had walked up. And she said, it's a beautiful morning for a walk, isn't it? And I said, yes. And she said, it's a beautiful mountain, isn't it? And I said, yes. And I thought, wow, that's, so I've got mother and I've got the C word, crone. And then it's honestly only about 40 meters to the car park. I walk into the car park and I still have my walking stick that I found as you tend to do, right? I actually found it in the car park from a previous day's walker having left them there. And I love that language and culture of walking. So I was obviously going to do the same. And I walk up and there are these three girls playing. They would have been about 9 to 11 maybe, friends or sisters, I don't know, playing in the car park. And one of them looks at the stick. It was a really cool stick. And her eyes kind of bulge and she's like, can I have your stick? And I'm like, oh, this is cool. So I end up with mother, out of sequence, mother, crone, maiden. And of course I give this girl my stick. And frankly, she grabs it and she promptly starts hitting a tree with it. Whatever, it's her mountain, it's her stick. It's an area for women's business. I'm not going to get in the way of it. But it was a really nice wink from the mountain because it was just me. And this is a place of women's mysteries, women's business. Everyone's welcome. It's not like a place of women's mysteries where you aren't allowed to go, but it contains much more women streaming than men's. So I was a bit like, I can only go so far into this, truly, obviously. And I wasn't sure how that was going to play out. And it was very moving to... Those are the three interactions I had on the mountain that day. And it was very moving to maybe just get that little wink from Guliga herself that whilst it's not my business, she's doing her women's business as the days go on. Now, one of the important ways, perhaps at least to my understanding, the most important way that Guliga is a library for Uncle Max is at the saddle part of the mountain, because it's actually a much more challenging walk than you realize, because there are no flat spots once you start. It's basically just straight up for, I think it ends up being like 7.5 kilometers. There's no flat spots. You hit the gradient and up you grade the whole way, with the exception of somewhere around a bit over halfway mark, is the saddle. And Uncle Max writes in the book that he's actually he's passed now, writes in the book that he's never been past the saddle because he hasn't felt called to. And at the saddle, and it's a little bit down, you have some creation stones and some dreaming stones for the Yuin people, because Guliga is not just the one mountain. She has her sons. One of them is nearby, and one of them is an offshore island that you dive on and is a home of men's herbal mystery, like the spirit keepers of that second son of Guliga, which is an island, Montague Island, off the coast is the Western word for it, is the home of, in that same library way, of men's herbal mysteries. So she's in relation and dialogue with country about her. Of course she is. She's the creation mother. And on the saddle, there are some, I have to tell you, very unusual dreaming stones. And these are the stones of different spirit beings from the dreaming, from the creation moment that retain that energy. Now, you can do the walk whenever you want on your own. At certain times of the year, you can also do guided walks with Yuin people who can explain these things to you more. And I tried to arrange them beforehand, but there were no guided walks at the time I was there. They're actually not even, at the time of recording, not even starting yet. It's May and in the cooler months of the year, which, believe me, I understand. So I visited these stones, but I wasn't with a Yuin person, and that bit's fine. You have the blanket permission to do that, right? I have seen online mixed information about whether you should video or film these creation stones without Yuin permission. So I erred on the side of respect and caution, and I did not film them. But I'm there encountering at least some of these stones and their power and their mystery. And a thought occurs to me. Well, I can't film these, but in Uncle Max's book, the photographer obviously has permission to share these stones. And so why don't I video the book and in that way share a permissioned depiction of these stones? So that's what we're doing. I'm going to show you, and they are beautiful pictures. Like, the book does a better job than I could have with this material. And because this is a bit of a theme for the Animism series, we're going to read again from Wade Davis' The Wayfinders, 2 different segments. And what's beautiful about doing this here in the Andes in South America is both of these stories actually do come from South America, just, well, frankly, quite a ways further north. These are 2 different stories from what we now call Colombia. And the first one is about the cosmovision of the Barasana, okay? And I'm going to read, it's in a reference to plants, and I want to read it because it shows how the experience of a cosmos of community of beings who can teach and contain much larger so-called information than we may experience as real or available in a Western context is as close to a universal as you're going to find. And I write about this in Ani.Mystic. I think that is hugely significant, with the obvious hand-waving caveats about previous attempts at applying universals in the 19th century, which is principally what is explored in Ani.Mystic as a book. Thus, for the people living today in the forests of the Pira Paraná, the entire natural world is saturated with meaning and cosmological significance. Every rock and waterfall embodies a story. Plants and animals are but distinct physical manifestations of the same essential spiritual essence. At the same time, everything is more than it appears, for the visible world is only one level of perception. Behind every tangible form, every plant and animal, is a shadow dimension, a place invisible to ordinary people but visible to the shaman. This is the realm of the Hay spirits, a world of deified ancestors where rocks and rivers are alive, plants and animals are human beings, sap and blood are the bodily fluids of the primordial river of the Anaconda. Hidden in cataracts, behind the physical veil of waterfalls, in the very center of stones are the great malokas of the Hay spirits, where everything is beautiful, the shining feathers, the coca, the calabash of tobacco powder, which is itself the skull and brain of the sun. It is to the realm of the Hay spirits that the shaman goes in ritual. Contrary to popular lore in the West, the shaman of the Barasana never uses or manipulates medicinal plants. His duty and sacred task is to move into the timeless realm of the Hay, embrace the primordial powers, and harness and restore the energy of all creation. He is like a modern engineer who enters the depths of a nuclear reactor to renew the entire cosmic order. So, amongst the Barasana, we have this idea of, if we may put in dialogue, and I have a better word for it coming up at the end of the video, the Barasana experience of stones and waterfalls, and the Yuin experience, as described by Uncle Max in his book, at least, of these creation stones on Guliga. You have the lived understanding and experience that what we can encounter in the physical is the iceberg tip of the totality of those beings. So, staying in Colombia, and off the top of my head, I can't recall if I shared these very old now documentaries, fascinating documentaries from the early 90s, BBC ones, about the Kogi in northern Colombia. And this is a quote about Kogi priests called mamas. And I'm sharing this to demonstrate what a culture or a cosmovision that hasn't been as profoundly assaulted by the colonial process as we might find in Aboriginal Australia, what that looks like at peak, engaging with the more than human and accessing the libraries of the cosmos. When the mamas, or priests, speak, they instantly reveal their reference points are not of our world. They refer to Columbus as if his arrival were a recent event. They talk of the Great Mother as if she were alive, and for them she is, resonant and manifest in every instant in their conception of Aluna, a word that translates as water, earth, matter, generative spirit, life force. What is important, what has ultimate value, what gives life purpose is not what is measured and seen, but what exists in the realm of Aluna, the abstract dimension of meaning. The 9-layered universe, the 9-tiered temple, the 9 months a child spends in its mother's womb are all reflections of divine creation, and each informs the other. Thus, a liana is also a snake, the mountains a model of the cosmos, the conical hats worn by the Ahuaco men represent the snowfields of the sacred peaks, the hairs on a person's body echo of the forest trees that cover the mountain flanks. Every element of nature is imbued with higher significance, such that even the most modest of creatures can be seen as a teacher, and the smallest grain of sand is a mirror of the universe. There are two things I wanted to table at that point, which is that's very Hermetic, and I have some other Hermetic projects coming up, which, depending on when you're watching this, will be linked below. And the other thing is, Wade Davis mentions mountains as the, let me find that, model of the cosmos. And probably this is the same for everyone. I used to think maybe it was just me being special, but I love mountains. I think we all do. I think human psychology, whatever that means, is enriched and enlightened and enlivened by mountains. The world mountain, which I explore in detail in Star.Ships, is another one of those, dare I say, universal archetypes, which finds its expression later on as humans start to, in parts of the world, live more with stone in the creation of pyramids and so-called artificial world mountains. They're not artificial. They are resonant of mountains, which themselves are resonant of how the cosmos works. And that's that final layer of the Guliga creation library component. She is a creation being that is also a crystal, that is also a mountain, which itself is an archetypal expression of the whole cosmos. She's the creation mother. And consequently, you have access to all the information of the cosmos because it is a model of it and the cosmos at the same time, if you have the right library card. And after my few days at Guliga, speaking of not having the right library card or having misplaced it recently, I drove down the coast to overnight at a town curiously called Eden on my way back to Melbourne to get the ferry to get back to Tasmania. And I generally like faded tourist towns. And this is one of them. And it's very haunted, literally by ghosts, but also haunted by like not great pasts. It's the home of some very extensive whaling. But there are a whole bunch of synchronicities when I got there. Our Lady Star of the Sea, which is a very important, speaking of archetypal form of the Divine Mother for me. And St. Mary MacKillop, which if you're an OG Rune Soup premium member, you will also have a relationship with, Australia's first ever saint. And there's a church and a school there devoted to her because she has a family connection there, including her mother being in a shipwreck off the coast. And I have a peculiar connection to the town. So my flatmate in London, she wasn't from there, but grew up going there for a holiday. So she was living in London and she bought a home in Eden. I have no idea if she's there now. We've lost contact. But her plan, she was doing the classic Australian thing of making money in the UK to put back into Australia. That process from an economic success and average salary perspective has reversed, but not at the time. And it's a really sharky place just to complete the synchronicitous overlap with me because of my obsession with sharks and previously worked for Discovery Channel, to the point that I happen to know that one of Australia's strangest great white shark attack survivals happened there, where a guy was scuba diving for abalone and all of a sudden he was inside a shark's mouth. But he survived because the shark's head came through and basically bit on the tank and did the shake fair and let him go. But had he not, he would have been bitten in half. Funny thing to laugh about, but if you can find the video online, hearing that particular Australian accent share the story, you'll laugh too. Anyway, why Eden was a good place to think with libraries and museums and places of stored knowledge, which is the overarching metaphor or through line of the first of this video trilogy, is there's a museum there to whaling and all the rest of it. And I actually like regional museums. You know, when you drive through a very tiny town and there's like the local train museum, and it's just like a building, and there'll be some man who's lived in the town his whole life in his late 60s sitting at the counter waiting to take your $3, and he loves this shit. And there's something very adorable in that. But this strange place and its categorization of the crime that went on there, which was the whaling. And just comparing that to the activities that Lake Mungo is going about in her transformation of our understanding of human ceremony. And most recently, literally the day before, my frankly almost psychedelic experience of walking on a crystal creation mountain and feeling the knowledge, if not having exactly, I had the library card, I suppose, but I didn't read the language she was speaking. So I had a library card to, I don't know, a Spanish library. It was exactly the right synchronicitous thing to have happened, because elsewhere in Uncle Max's book, he talks about how the Yuin and the Aboriginal peoples in general of the South Coast would be in relation to the cetaceans, the various mammals of the ocean, including how they would, and it was his uncle who would do this, hunt fish in conjunction with the dolphins. So they would head to the ocean and be communicating with the dolphins, who would participate with the humans in the hunting and herding of fish, which the humans would catch and then share with the dolphins. And I think about that form of relation versus the terrifying, historic images of the whaling that went on. So at some point between being in such good relation that you are hunting buddies with the ocean-going mammals of the coast to completely decimating them, it was the right place to understand what happens when the library card situation goes wrong, but how close it is. Like Uncle Max's uncle, we're talking about 100, 120 years ago, the South Coast was doing that right. And there's an optimism in that, particularly from an animist perspective of time. And all of that is going on in my head in a place called Eden. So we, so-called, in the West, have a declined but not defunct symbology. Eden is a creation moment. So I went from Guliga, creation moment, to Eden, creation moment. And whilst there, Our Lady Star of the Sea, Mary MacKillop, sharks, it's there. So we're still cats in the library. It's moving about us. It has the agency that we spoke about in the second video. And part of what I think it falls to us, so-called, to do is to step initially into that understanding rather than, I mean, certainly not. This, can you even imagine? Oh, okay, well, let's all adopt Guliga as our divine mother and start worshipping a mountain on the south coast of New South Wales, wherever you happen to be in the world. Like, it's not that, is it? It has to begin with where we are, with the pieces that we are in relation to, and those pieces in relation to, dare I say, the same pieces elsewhere. Because Eden isn't Guliga, obviously. The idea of a creation moment is, and I use this term a lot in Animistic, something like. So Guliga is something like Eden. It is the birthplace of the first two beings, two brothers in this case, for instance. You see, it's like, okay, and to complete the enfolding synchronicities with a place I did not expect to go, which was Canberra. Driving into Canberra, I was listening to Tyson Yunkaporta's podcast about serpents and about the rainbow serpent and so on. And there is a healing being in my lineage. So one of my helping spirits is Sachamama, which is a Amazonian serpent spirit. And towards the end of the video, he was talking about embassy business. Now, this is an Aboriginal Australian term. And it means, in that exact context, co-learning across the indigenous cosmovisions of the world, because famously there is in almost all, at least to my knowledge, Aboriginal cosmovisions, a rainbow serpent. And embassy work would be looking at Amaru as a other form of creation snake, which you find here amongst the Aymara in the Andes, or Sachamama as serpent in the Amazon, or the Nagas in South Asia. You understand what I'm talking about here. And this is a beautiful word, because embassy work is respectful co-learning. And I listened to, which wasn't as good, another snake podcast of his, sitting there in Eden thinking, well, it's Eden, might as well have a serpent. And why I figured I would push on the serpent embassy business was on the walk down, having done my ceremony of gratitude and permission at the saddle on Guliga the day before. Whilst walking down and back out, before I encountered I don't want to call her a crone, unless people want to restore and elevate that term, but that older woman, about halfway down the mountain, I encountered an enormous and beautiful red belly black snake. And it was legging it. I mean, they don't have legs, but these, although deadly, are timid. And it was huge, huge. And off it went into the jungle. And I was listening to this not as good podcast about snakes that Tyson had put out. And he was talking to a man of Indian descent about his first experience in Australia, and he was going for a run that first morning, and he encountered a red belly black snake that didn't move for him. And that was the beginning of their discussion of embassy work around snakes in South Asia, Nagas, and Aboriginal Australia, and so on. And for me, that was a nice situating of myself in a conversation that didn't include me at the level of embassy work on snake. And because Tyson explicitly says in the podcast that, well, that's an interesting sign, because a red belly black snake will typically flee from humans, and that's exactly what mine did, but it didn't happen to this guy. And that was my way in. That's the beginnings of, that's part of how we have a different way of learning. That's part of how we check books out of this library, is to see the meaning and see the significance when they are there. So embassy work, or embassy business, is a term I want to leave you with, Western magical practitioners, at the end of this initial trilogy, because we've moved through cosmos as a community of beings. We've moved into that community of beings as having agency outside of the human. And in this video, we've moved to those beings having knowledge. And then it's, so what am I to do? And I would say it's embassy work, which is a better, dare I say, animist, or at least living cosmos way of describing co-learning through comparison. Comparing healing traditions, comparing the serpent, comparing mountains. We've used these words historically, and you're still doing that? But see how that feels from the perspective of embassy work. It's different embassy work to Tyson. Tyson's hunting a particular dog. That's the restoration of indigenous sovereignty and indigenous political power around the world, which I'm certainly in support of, but that's not my embassy work. My embassy work is the goal of having so-called Western magic be able to look eye to eye with other expressions of magic around the cosmos. And if you situate yourself in this story of embassy work, you are an ambassador for a currently declined, or at least miscommunicative, symbology in serpent, angels. Dare I say the Bible, from a magical perspective, not from a religious perspective. You are an ambassador for that, with an interest in, a political interest in, hence embassy, other cosmovisions around the world. And that gives you a bit more agency yourself in exploring respectfully and from a position of co-sovereignty modalities and forms and ideas and spirits around the cosmos, because the European imperial project did a number on everyone, unevenly, of course, and part of how we all, I don't know, move into that more beautiful world our hearts know as possible, is to find the right way of engaging and co-learning. And contained within that, I think, is this idea of embassy work, which itself is contained in a cosmos that has a very specific telos. So that's it. Those are my first 3 Animism explained videos. And as is usually the way, I've snuck some homework you were not expecting in towards the end. But please do sit with this idea and see how it transforms you on an energetic level, and just quietly ask what is yours to do in that context. And if you like this and you get value from it, share it. I mean, like and subscribe, but share these videos with someone you think will enjoy them.